Hello and welcome to another edition of Political Insider. I'm your host, Herald-Tribune political editor Zac Anderson. Joining me today is State Senator Bill Galvano. Senator Galvano is a Bradenton Republican who served 8 years in the House of Representatives before being elected to the Senate in 2012. He is currently the majority leader in the Senate, and he's on track to become Senate President in 2018. Senator Galvano, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you.
It's good to be back home, too.
Yes, I know. You had just wrapped up the legislative session here, and it went relatively smoothly, especially compared to last year when you guys went into overtime because of some fighting over the budget and Medicaid expansion. How important was it to you, given what happened last year, for you guys to finish on time and with minimal drama this year?
Well, you make a great point. It was a lot more difficult last year because we also had the litigation with reapportionment hanging over us, and we had special sessions dealing with that. And we ended up working really the entire year. I know personally, with committee hearings as well as session and special sessions and time that I spent in the court system with reapportionment, it was 40 weeks of time. We saw a lot get resolved towards the end of the year. Reapportionment was resolved. We did come back and pass our budget last year, and so when we went into session early this year, I think it was with the desire that we get our work done, show the residents of Florida that we can be cooperative and that we can accomplish what needs to be accomplished, and then sign, die, and come home. And that's exactly what happened.
You did that. What do you see as some of the highlights this year?
Well, I think right out of the gate, to have major water policy pass the first week of session, as well as the continued expansion of the support for persons with unique abilities. That's something that's always been very important to me in my career, but to see that type of legislation that impacts the educational system for these particular families get through, along with the environmental issues. And then throughout the whole session, we're putting points on the board, as I like to say. At the end of the session, we put $145 million into Everglades restoration. We cut $550 million in taxes, and still had money, $3 billion to put aside in our rainy day fund.
For surplus.
And the governor has already indicated what he will or will not veto, and it's
relatively small number.
Relatively small, especially compared to where we were last year, based on some of the rancor that existed on the Medicaid issue.
And it's interesting, the governor did decide to issue a relatively smaller veto list, especially compared to last year when I think it was a record amount or near record amount. And really the governor's reaction to the session is one reason that it went so smoothly, because he didn't really get everything that he wanted. He had two priorities for the year, a $250 million economic incentive package and a $1 billion tax cut. The House refused to go along with the incentive package. I know the Senate was willing to bargain over that, but it didn't work out. And then the tax cut got cut to about in half of what the governor wanted. It's relatively unusual for the governor not to get his priorities like that. What did you make of that? Was he just asking for too much? Was there a little bit of rancor left over from last year?
Well, I think he came out of the gate aggressive in what he wanted. He wanted $250 million in EFI, Enterprise Florida, funding initiatives, and we met that number in our Senate budget and held the position as long as we could. He also had a high number on taxation. But I think he realizes that the governor can only recommend a budget. At the end of the day, it's the legislature that puts the numbers on paper and actually puts a budget together. And then the governor has the last word with the line item veto, something I wish they had in D.C. But I think he took a realistic approach. He saw that there were sincere efforts to meet him on both initiatives, but that as we vetted through the actual numbers and the needs of the state of Florida, that it didn't end up where he thought it could be out of the gate. And he continued to cooperate with us in that regard by making sure our budget got through for the most part.
And he basically just declared victory and moved on. Were you surprised at all? I mean, some people were thinking that he might veto the whole budget because he didn't get exactly what he wanted. That's a pretty drastic step, though.
Well, he does. He has the right to declare victory in terms of his tax cuts.
Right.
If you look at, I believe it was $440 million last year,
Sure.
another $550 this year. So you are really at a $1 billion in tax cuts. And whether a victory was to have it in this one single session over 2 years, at the end of the day, Floridians are paying less,
right.
substantially less in tax. Our budget continues to grow.
Right.
We're at $82 billion. And the needs are being met, and we're putting money aside. So there's a lot for everyone to be pleased with about this legislative session in both chambers and in both parties, as well as the executive branch.
So last year, it seemed like the House and the governor sort of teamed up a little bit in regards to Medicaid expansion to stop that. This year, it seemed like the House and the Senate were sort of on the same page in terms of what they wanted out of the budget. The common denominator there is the House. Some people think that they've maybe played a little bit more of a decisive role than in the past. Where do you see the balance of power lying right now in Tallahassee?
Well, I think what you saw throughout the balance of the year last year, and that maybe has been lost on some of the people following this, is that the House and Senate actually got on the same page.
Right.
And we did so with reapportionment. When Chairman Oliva and I went into conference, we reached an agreement on the conference report. We reached agreement on the procedures. And as difficult as it was, having to live in that world with the court looking over our shoulders, it helped rebuild the trust and relationship between the chambers. You move into this session, that was the alliance that I think was prominent through the session,
sure.
the House and Senate. And we each came at it from different angles, but at the end of the day, we were able to negotiate a middle position. And with that type of strength, the executive branch, the governor has to go along.
Has to respect that.
Has to respect it. And that's exactly what we're seeing.
It'll be interesting to see how that plays out, especially going into an election cycle. That's kind of where the attention is turning in political circles here now that the session is over. And, it's going to be a really interesting election cycle, especially with with the new maps being drawn. You have all 40 Senate seats up for re-election. And the new maps, a lot of people are saying that they lean more Democratic, that Democrats could pick up some seats here. What is your sense? Do you think that Republicans could lose some seats in the majority? And how does that change the dynamic in the legislature if that happens?
Well, we do have 40 senators up for re-election. And a good chunk of those were leaving irrespective.
Right.
They were terming out or seeking additional or other office or higher office or local office, things of that nature. We do have new maps, but I feel like when I look at the configurations of these districts, the history of the voters that they encompass, and just the tactical financial advantage that we continue to have as a majority party, and I'm speaking as majority leader, I'm not pessimistic. I don't believe that we're going to see a major shift in power in the Florida Senate. Does that mean there aren't difficult races? No, it doesn't mean that. I mean, we have to be vigilant and work hard this summer, but I would not expect that you're going to go into the next session with a legislature that's drastically different than what we had this past session.
And I'm sure you're hoping for that as well, since you're going to be Senate President. I'm sure you'd like a big majority. But even if, it seems like Republicans, if they do win some of these swing seats, will probably have to put up some more moderate candidates. You never know. If the Senate does trend a little bit more moderate and the House continues to be pretty staunchly conservative, do you worry about, you guys had a pretty amicable session this year. Do you worry about kind of bigger showdowns to come here potentially?
Well, I think you're always going to have that as part of the process, and that was at the heart of the controversy on the fixed plan for health insurance. The Senate is different than the House. I spent 8 years in the House. I was Rules Chairman in the House, and senators, each senator, just by virtue of the number of people they represent, it's a different dynamic. They are more powerful, and leadership in the Senate is more bottom up than top down.
And they have to appeal to a broader base of people to have larger districts.
Absolutely. And so you're always going to have a check and balance between the two chambers. I'm not convinced that simply because we have new districts that's going to change one way or another in any drastic fashion.
Okay. Well, it'll be fascinating to see how it plays out, especially for a political reporter like myself, and I'm sure you're going to be very involved in it. We'll leave it at that. Senator, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us for another edition of Political Insider. Please come back and tune in again next week.